Yeah, well, it seems to me that what you're doing is a radical integration of valued approaches, and instead of getting locked into just one mode, that you're really covering the waterfront and integrating and being flexible. Uh,
Hmm.
and So I'm wondering, and one of the things I was struck by is, I was thinking, well, let's talk about your book, and
Hmm.
you don't have a book, I
I don't have a
gather.
book yet.
And I can understand that you don't have a book because you're so busy doing all of
Yeah,
this
yeah.
stuff. So I'm wondering, it seems to me that that you would appear to be well poised to be in a major leadership role in the field.
Hmm.
And so I'm wondering, uh, what's your sense of how influential you've been able to be, given that you don't have the book?
Sure, sure. So, particularly, actually, I made a decision way back, actually, right around when we had talked, that I really wanted to look at how I want my life to be. So, you were mentioning about all the training and such. The first year I renewed my license, you're supposed to get 36 hours of continuing education. I counted up, I had 320 something hours.
I
So I
can
did
believe
all
it.
this training, and then I had my children. And I kind of had that decision point of, am I going to write a book? Am I go do, talking and things like that, different conferences? And I decided I was going to really kind of focus on my family, my kids, and then later on, if that was in the cards for me. And actually, the Institute, I was at the Mental Research Institute in Palo Alto. And
But let me just interrupt to applaud
yeah,
you that you decided in favor of walking the walk rather
oh,
than
yeah.
just talking the talk. That you said, "Wait a second, I'm having a life here. I'm building a family." You know, and there have been family therapists who had no families.
Yes, yeah.
One of the most influential people in the field was Virginia Satir.
Mm-hmm.
And I took workshops with Virginia Satir back in the day, but she had no family. She spent all of her time traveling around the country and the world
Mm-hmm.
training people.
Yeah.
Yeah, so good for you.
Yeah. Well, there's a
And
lot of people I know that are family therapists that don't have families for whatever reason. I've got one person I know, their family because of infertility, another one out of choice, but they also have their extended family, their uncles or aunts or their nieces and nephews and so on.
yeah,
But sometimes they don't have their own children. But yeah, yeah, for me, my I always wanted to be a dad, and so that was I was always excited to have kids, and that was
well,
really good.
how many kids do you have and what are their ages?
I have two kids, 13 and 9 years old. Um,
Okay.
and I always joke that, I'll have been working with teenagers now for, oh gosh, 25 years. And I always said, as soon as I have a teenager, it's all going to go out the window.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you
But
haven't hit that famous stage of pretty severe testing
yeah,
that can
yeah. Well,
happen.
we're getting there. Uh,
Yeah,
with every developmental level, we need to be flexible. And that's actually
yeah,
an aspect of systems theory is that when the system gets rigid and there is a developmental period, and the parents don't become flexible and kind of create a new
yeah.
way of being, then we get stuck. So we're in that process of really, finding that.
And if I may continue to be personal, are you
Sure.
also married or coupled up?
I am married.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm actually so this is my second marriage. I had gotten divorced some years ago and then got remarried. And
So that gives you some authority about that because a lot of your clients are going to be in that process of having been married or getting divorced, etc.
well, and also to getting into a relationship. I had been with my first wife since I was gosh, we met when I was 21. And and doing all this work and learning and so on, I got it, but I didn't quite really get it. And then going into a relationship later on as an adult, I just got it so much more. And
Yeah.
the ability to learn how to be completely open, connected, to communicate, like, And I thought we had communicated in my first marriage, but not to the level of what I've really understood now. And it's really helped me, not only my wife and I have a really strong connected relationship, but also, really in me helping the couples that I work with.
Right.
And oftentimes, sometimes they'll get to a place where it's kind of good. I'm like, it could be better. And so really kind of helping them because I know what that is like and that kind of
Uh-huh.
and also how to get it, which is nice. And the EFT is just a perfect kind of modality to get there. Yeah.
The EFT stands for,
Oh, sorry, emotionally focused couples therapy.
okay.
Johnson's work that's
Yeah.
based on attachment theory.
Okay. Yes. Attachment theory. Yeah. Well, you have that was on my list of things to talk about. Say a little because attachment theory seems to have really come into its own,
Oh yeah.
and it's so important. And we understand attachment now, not just from a psychoanalytic point of view, but a neuropsychoanalytic point of
Mhm.
view. We know about attachment systems in the brain and so on. So this has been a really hot area that I've just been very excited to be on the sidelines of.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's so important. And actually, I was working with a couple where I was using some of my, Gottman level one training with, and I ended up doing the training with Sue Johnson and Scott Woolley in EFT. And I brought my couple down to do a live demonstration. And it was like night and day. Like in the work we were doing, we were just skimming the surface. And this really got to the heart of the matter in what Scott was able to do in just this one session. And it just sold me. It just made
Yeah,
sense. And really for the couples that I work with, the way that I conceptualize attachment is that to the extent that the other is responsive, whether to talk about our bad day, talk about the thing they said that upset us, or for the kids to, talk about what's going on for them. Um, and then also to the extent that we feel loved, accepted, respected in the relationship. When those two things are there, things are going well. When they're not there, we tend to get into these patterns or these cycles where we're usually trying to do the thing that makes most sense to us to either gain connection or prevent distance. But sometimes it's the opposite of what the other person needs. So we end up going back and forth in these, what we call in EFT, these cycles that end up drawing us, kind of moving us farther apart. And so in EFT, we're really identifying those cycles, slowing it down, helping the clients turn to their partner vulnerably. And then in that stage two work, really do that rebonding work. But I mean, the way I think about it, attachment not only it makes sense, of course, in relation to couples or children, adolescents, and families, but also with our sense of self. When I was at the Beck Institute, Judith Beck had discussed some of Aaron Beck's writing, and how he talked about all automatic thoughts boil down to feeling helpless, hopeless, or unlovable. And it really struck me because the couples I was working with, when their partner was not responsive, they felt helpless, they felt hopeless
hmm
when they didn't feel loved, respected, valued. They felt maybe I'm actually unlovable. And so I thought, not only do we relate to others this way, but also to our sense of self.
yeah,
And I've been doing a lot more training in parts work and IFS, internal family systems, and this idea of kind of our responsiveness to the different parts of ourself. Uh,
right.
and so not only is kind of attachment the way we relate to others, but also to ourself and as well as the world. When there's been trauma, for example, the world does not feel responsive. It feels out of control. So that's kind of one way. And then I also think about in our therapeutic relationship, there's also that attachment, and not necessarily in a, needing to reparent the person in more of a kind of analytic way, but more, does our client feel like we're responsive? And do they feel not necessarily that we love them, but that unconditional positive regard, feeling valued, respected? And when we have that good attachment, and we can even get that beginning in the initial phone call. And actually, that outcome research, the Scott Miller and Barry Duncan, I think about that in attachment terms. Because at the end of the session, as the client's giving feedback, they might say, "Gosh, I felt like you didn't understand what I was saying about my mother." I could say, "Well, let me write that down. That's really important. I want to start off at the beginning of the next session." Or I might say, "You're right. I don't think I was conveying how betrayed you felt." Hopefully that client is walking away feeling they've experienced me as responsive and that I'm valuing and what they have to say is important. So they're not walking away going, "Oh, you didn't get me today," but more feel like, "Oh, there was a miss, but it's important to my therapist that he gets me. So again, that kind of idea of that attachment and feeling understood
Yeah.
and safe.
Now you've been talking about systems, and that makes me think about the larger systems that we're embedded in.
Mm-hmm,
Uh, um, in the U.S., the political systems,
mm-hmm,
the 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 splits that are happening in our culture.
mm-hmm,
Um, this is a difficult time to be an individual,
mm-hmm.
let alone to be a family. And so, how is that cross-cutting your work?
Yeah. Well, in we always have to think about kind of the multiple levels of systems. Uh,
Yeah,
I mean, particularly, in the areas of culture, around issues around privilege, around racism, sexism, genderism, all these kind of aspects are affecting our clients, as well as the dynamic between the therapist and the client. Also, right, looking at kind of the movements that's happening in the culture with the news and how that's affecting clients and increasing levels of anxiety, increasing animosity. There's all these kind of aspects that, is a kind of a beyond the scope of this discussion, but right, like the way that even the agencies are changing and needing to get clicks, right? Because there's less newspapers, so they have to say things that are inflammatory, and it's not
right.
just reporting the facts, but more what's going to have that
Yeah,
emotional impact on the person to
right.
get them to click on that. And so we've got a lot of, and also, what's happened in the culture too, around a culture of mistrusting experts and so on.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
really wreaked havoc in our political system and our kind of organizational structures, and so on. But really kind of looking at those multiple levels of systems is so important because it all applies.
yeah. It does all apply, and in a sense, you're swimming against that tide of and so it'll be interesting to see as time goes on how you're able to navigate some of the changes that we're all being
Yeah.
challenged by.
Well, and a systemic thinker is always thinking about context
Yeah,
and how that context is affecting the individual. Um, I forget if I heard Phil Zimbardo, who did the Stanford prison study experiment,
yeah,
asked, and as he was talking about it, he added something I'd never heard before. He said, "You know what? Stanley Milgram actually grew up just only a few blocks away from him. They didn't know each other." But he
huh,
said, what
yeah,
was it about that neighborhood in the Bronx that led these two people to go do this profound research on
right.
systems? And so just kind of on context and how that affects, people. And so it's just interesting what was going on in the context of that neighborhood in New York that led these two people to get these ideas and go on to this incredible research.